Hello everyone, this is Tim, and I want to talk about the MiniSix RPG, which is basically kind of like a rules light version, kind of like a boiled down version of the open D6 RPGs like D6 Space, D6 Fantasy, D6 Adventure, and those are of course what happened after like the Star Wars D6 came out, and those are free right now. You can actually download them. I'll put a link downstairs in the dungeon. So the MiniSix RPG, like what is it? The game basically uses D6s only. You roll a number of D6 and you basically add them up, you total them together, and you add any modifiers to that total. And you're trying to beat like a target number that's basically set by the GM. One of these dice is basically a wild die, and this dice can explode whenever a 6 comes up. And at the end, you basically just total everything together. So if you had 3d6 for what you were rolling, you decide like which one was the wild die and have like a different color die, and you roll that out, and if that one comes up as a 6, it just basically just keeps blowing up if you keep rolling 6s, and then you just total everything together, and hopefully you can beat that target number. And it's a pretty cool idea for a mechanic. I'm going to be playing a Star Wars D6 game in a little while, and I'll get some experience with the system, see how it works. But MiniSix is definitely more like cut back, and there's a lot of, as Tetsubu would say, there's a lot of holes where GMs can come up with their own rules for things and make rulings instead. And those are the kind of games that I usually like, so I was excited to see this. To make a character, you distribute 12 dice between 4 stats. You have Might, Agility, Wit, and Charm. And they can have anywhere from 1 to 4 dice associated with it. So you might have Might as 3d6 and Agility as like 2d6, depending on what you want to do for your character. You can then distribute 7 dice between skills and perks. And perks are kind of like feats or talents, those kind of things from other RPGs. The skills are under a certain stat. So the skills under that stat get those like stat dice as well. So if you have basically like a skill under the Might stat, for instance, then like if Might was 2d6 and this skill was 3d6, you'd have a total of 5d6. So you just add them together. I thought that was pretty sweet. So there are suggested skills for different genres, because this is kind of a generic, like open-ended. You can bring any sort of genre you want into it. So they give like suggested skill lists, but they basically just say if you want more skills, add more skills, depending on what you want to do, how specific you want the skills to be. And it's basically more like a GM's toolkit. You can just do whatever you want with it. Skills can have specializations that can break this 2 dice limit during character creation. You can really only have a 2 dice rating for your skills unless you have one of these specializations. But they have a narrow use, so don't let your players abuse that. Perks have a cost in dice, and those are basically bought like unspent skill dice. So if you want to buy your perks, you have to decide how many skills you want and how expensive your perks are and try to balance it out. It's also interesting that in MiniSix, perks you have racial descriptions if you want to have that. So if you're going to use like a fantasy, MiniSix in a fantasy game, then you would want to buy like the dwarf perk, for instance. And again, perks kind of remind me of the talents in like Rollmaster and Harp, as well as the feats in D20 games. During character creation, you can take up to 2 complications, and they give you 1 CP whenever they come up in a session. And CPs are basically what you use to improve your character later. They kind of remind me a little bit of like the White Wolf, World Darkness way they hand out XP. There is a short list of weapons that only use a combination of D6 and modifiers to describe their damage. The sizes of the opponents can alter this damage, especially if you are larger attacking a smaller target. They give you extra bonuses. So like really big things squish tiny little things pretty easily. The target numbers for any of the tasks you're trying to perform are anywhere from like 2 to like 31 and on. 31 being really tough. But with that wild die, you can really, if you can manage to roll a 6, that actually can help you out a lot. Initiative is by each character rolling their agility dice and adding the totals. and the highest goes first on the lowest. Each session, the GM gives out those CPs, or character points, and they're usually in a range from like 3 to 7, depending on the difficulty of the session, and how much or how well the GM thinks you did. Skills can be increased by one pip, like the dot on the dice, by spending a number of CPs equal to its current number of dice. Skills can only be raised 1 pip per session, so it has like this. You have to spend some time increasing each skill, and you can't just like automatically increase one real fast. Stats are really expensive to increase, but you can do it. It just takes a lot of time, and you basically just have to save up your character points. There are hero points in the game, and characters start out with one of them. And these can also be gained during the session, during play, if the GM feels it's appropriate. And you can spend these to get any sort of benefits. Again, these are kind of like fate points in other games. The nice option with these hero points, though, is you have an option to buy a clue. Basically, when your character is stumped or lost, or you're really not sure what to try to do next. So that was a nice little option. I like when fate points let you kind of influence things as a player and give you a little bit more help, I guess. There are 2 optional methods of combat. There's kind of like a fast, static version, so your defense is static, and there's like the traditional D6 version, where it's more dynamic and there's more dice rolling. The game has wound levels that are, again, kind of reminding me of World of Darkness, where there's certain levels and they give dice penalties. There are vehicle stats and combat with basically a rough guesstimation for how much they cost. And it's basically just little dollar signs. The more dollar signs something has, the more expensive it is. And there are some sample vehicles in there for all sorts of genres. There's a simple magic system, and you need to start out with the esoteric perk to even be able to cast spells, if that's even right for the genre. Again, this is kind of generic, so you can use this system in any genre you want. Some genres might need a little bit more help, but you get the idea. There's a magic skill, and you basically just have to roll and make sure your magic works, and that is based off your wit stat. You need a certain target number to succeed, and if the spell is attacking somebody, you also need to, basically, it's almost like you're throwing the spell or casting the spell in kind of a literal sense, which I thought was kind of neat. And if you fail your skill roll for that spell, you get dice penalties that only go away if you rest. So I thought that was pretty interesting, a different way to do that. Yeah, let's see what else we got in here. Learning new spells costs 2 CP, so there's like basically a cost involved. And again, those are handed out during the session. There are some suggested magic items and a pretty small list of spells, but they give you enough where if you want to make more, you can. And again, you do have the fuller D6 free games out there to borrow from, take optional rules from, etc. There are 3 pages of spells in there. There's also 4 pages of example NPCs and characters for different genres. So there's sci-fi, fantasy, just pulpy adventure. There are optional rules at the back of the book. So you'll read through and you're like, oh, okay, wait, that's it? And then there's some optional stuff at the end if you want to add to it. But it's pretty rules light, pretty bare bones. I think some of you guys really like this, especially those that enjoyed like the D6 system. And these optional rules were pretty enjoyable to read through. I was kind of impressed. There's several pages of GM advice and basically converting things from the full D6 to mini D6. There are 5 example settings in the back that are brief, but they give you enough information to kind of allow you to spin off of them if you have your own ideas. There's a cheat sheet, which is nice to hand out to new players, and a character sheet, so you can really tweak that or make your own sheet or use the one that's in the book. Overall, I like the MiniSix. It seems pretty light. It kind of reminds me of other rules light games that are out there, and I recommend it, especially if you like the D6 system, if you're a Star Wars D6 fan, or you just like rules light games in general. Alright guys, thanks a lot. I'll talk to you later.